one of our contrarian truths at 15, 17 is that child labor is good. And, we don't mean in the exploitative sense. We mean there's so much creativity and energy. And to be told you have to wait, you have to keep waiting when this learning curve is getting accelerated doesn't make any sense anymore. We try to think of these like descriptors of what our founders are like. And this was true for people in the Thiel Fellowship too. There's this energy of like a dog on a leash, and a dog on a leash who's pulling on that leash really hard. It needs to be cut. It needs to be like, go, run as fast as you can. And I think the stigma around not having a degree is just lesser and lesser over time. So I'm always really confused why schools aren't like, hey, we're going to do a 2-year program instead of 4. Like even that, which is not very radical, would be radical.
Perfect. Danielle, thank you so much for talking today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So I'd like to just jump straight in here with if you could talk a little bit more about your early interest in education and how that eventually led you to uh, working with Peter Thiel on the fellowship.
Sure. Some of it just feels natural. I didn't need someone to um expose me to the idea of that um human development was interesting or anything like that. I was, even from a very young age, I was just kind of interested in those things. I was the type of student who would like stay in during recess and would want to work with the other kids who were having trouble with something. It's funny, I was not a good student. Like I did not get straight A's or anything like that. Um, I think I had like undiagnosed learning disabilities. But I think part of the way that I learned was also by just trying to like explain things to other people. So it came pretty naturally early on, but it was in my late teens, early 20s that I started learning about sort of alternative methodology. I had a friend who had a young daughter who was sending her daughter to a Sudbury Valley school. And I always had this sense that education could look different. And part of that actually had to do with my musical training. I was this sounds funny to say, but I was a competition level clarinetist. And when you have one on one teaching, you learn a lot about why that teacher matters and what you can get out of it and how it's different from a classroom setting and things like that. I mean, it's essentially like one on one tutoring, but in the music realm. Um, and so I had this sense of having worked with different teachers, one on one, like, okay, like some teachers work really well, some teachers don't work really well. Like, what is it that works there? So I had kind of some of this intuitive sense of, um, that one on one is pretty magical in and of itself, but also the deliverer of those messages also really, really matters. And sort of like the energy that that teacher has also really matters. I think a lot of us can think of, ideally, at least all of us can think of one teacher who was really, really great. Sadly, not everybody has had that experience. But I did get to have those experiences. And I was talking to someone recently who's very deep in chemistry, and he was telling me he was saying he was never going to get into chemistry, and then he had this like really engaging chemistry teacher who made it really interesting, and that got him down that path. But yeah, I started observing things like Sudbury Valley models and thinking like, gosh, that's really interesting that it's really all about being student led. um, and I actually ended up starting a tutoring company in San Diego, and kind of randomly, I got niched into homeschooling communities. This is back in the day and age when Craigslist was not creepy or less creepy. And I was A/B testing ads for my tutoring services and things like that. And I had a homeschooling family reach out, and I had never worked with homeschoolers before. And I was very curious. And I remember, I'll never forget going to this woman, Nancy's house. She has 5 children, who are all, grown young adults at this point. But I'll never forget showing up and the excitement of the children. Like, they ran to the door and, "Wow, you're here, can you stay longer today? Can we do math and science and some history?" And I was like, "Wow, who are these people? This is interesting." Because most of the tutoring I had been doing, I kinda described it a little bit like trying to place a Band-Aid on a bullet wound where, students were really behind, they were really disenfranchised, and I was there to help with, like, homework help. So it wasn't something where we could take the time to go back and really talk about fundamentals and, hey, yeah, okay, um, these more advanced topics are going to be harder if you don't have the basics down, and let's do that. There just wasn't time. But then when I was working with homeschoolers, what I noticed was like we were just working with where the students were at. And I also really noticed the reverence in which parents paid to their children in that following the child led attitude. And I worked with all kinds of homeschoolers, people who were, um, faith based homeschoolers, people who were secular homeschoolers. And I just noticed this trait in all of them of that they were really following their children's lead, which I had never really seen in education, and honestly, I'd never even seen in parenting, period, of, like, this idea that you would take your children really seriously and that they weren't just sort of appendages to the family. Um, and then, before getting into the fellowship stuff, um, I was reading a lot of books on, um, like, human and child development, and I don't think Maria Montessori gets enough credit. I think if Maria Montessori was a dude, we'd call her a philosopher, but instead we call her an educator. She's a philosopher, and if you read her work, she has the most profound respect for the human condition of anybody I've ever read, like, period. I always recommend starting with The Absorbent Mind. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, but I feel like I was able to sort of, like, port over some of that, like, respect that she had to the people that I was working with, and of course, I was reading, John Taylor Gatto and John Holt and all these different, like, very philosophical educators, which very much informed how I was working with students. And so then when I came into the Thiel Fellowship orbit, I was super excited to port over that homeschooling philosophy and that child-led philosophy to that program. So sometimes I used to call the fellowship an older young person's homeschool program. And sometimes with 1517, our fund, we say we're homeschooling CEOs. And it's very much this sense of we don't believe in a playbook or that there's only one way to do something. And in fact, it's more about crafting what a person needs in the moment. And often not even like crafting around their needs, but just unleashing them to do the thing they're supposed to do. Sometimes, we try to think of these like descriptors of what our founders are like, and this was true for people in the Teal Fellowship too, where there's this energy of like a dog on a leash. And a dog on a leash who's pulling on that leash really hard doesn't need food or water put down in front of it. It needs to be cut. It needs to be like, go, run as fast as you can. And so oftentimes with founders, that's sort of like the underpinning of everything we do is like non-coercion and freedom. Saying, hey, we believe that, yeah, you can go the distance here. Let's see what you can do. And of course, there's a lot of like community engagement and like resources in terms of helping people. But like the main thing is that underpinning of like, we're here to cut the leash with resources like money and say, go for it. When other people aren't ready to say that yet. And they're not only not ready to say that yet, but are also disbelievers.
Do you think there's something innate, like, about a person who's sort of contrarian like that? Because I've actually felt that myself. I went to a Montessori preschool and kindergarten,
Cool. Yeah.
and I felt it throughout, like, my entire schooling career. So, like, I don't want to go down this beaten path, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it's, like, something innate that you find inside the person? And if so, why does that type of person make a good founder, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, part of my belief is that, like, I think curiosity is a deep, deep human trait. Curiosity, I also think playfulness is a deep, deep human trait. And like some sense around playfulness is like it's like curiosity plus action put together. Because you're like doing something and maybe working with materials or um just trying to understand something in an interesting way. And I think a lot of the systems we have kind of like encumber people, where it's putting this layer on of like, now you have to do these things or you have to do things in a certain way instead of letting people have that like discovery angle. And so I think the world would be a pretty interesting place if we just let like sort of human flourishing happen through not putting all those layers on top of people. Now, I think that there are some people who something about their character or their will, um, like, they're able to see a little more clearly of, I'll just say it like, "This is bullshit," and, like, they're able to kinda grok that, um and there's something that, like, makes them push against those systems. For a lot of people, I think, like, complacency gets baked in pretty early, and in such a way that they don't even realize that it's happening. But then there's other people where they're like, you know, uh, that they have a little bit more of, like, that fight mentality, and I don't know exactly where that comes from. I don't know if it's kind of just, like, seeing the world a little bit more clearly of, like, "Hey, these adults around me are telling me I have to do a thing," but I actually know that is not true. Like, that's an opinion, that's not, like, a capital T truth level thing. So that I'd be curious to, like, I haven't thought super deeply about, like, yeah, like, what differentiates the people who have kind of that fight versus those who don't. Um, but that's my current April 10th theory.
Yeah, I mean, I've felt it all throughout my it always felt I was, like, being forced into a hole that I didn't fit in,
Yeah.
basically.
Mhm. Well, and I
So
think the thing there is that you recognize, 1, the force and the coercion, and you recognize, like, the hole and the lack of fit. Um, I think there's something like resignation that fits in for a lot of people where it's like they stop even being able to see that that's happening.
do you so say you're giving advice to someone who feels like that, and they don't necessarily, like, have a startup in mind, have an idea, right? What do you tell that person? Is it stay there and, um, like,
Yeah.
keep spinning your wheels and even, like, you're working towards something, you know that you shouldn't, like, be or you know innately that is not what you should be doing? Or, like, what do you do in that case, I guess?
I'm all for optionality in things, and this reminds me of times when, some of our old Thiel mentors would come and say, "Hey, I've got, you know, a child in middle school and we're thinking about homeschooling," and they were kind of nervous because there's this thing that happens in the human condition where when we take something on, we take on the identity of it. And so people would think like, "Oh, if I become a homeschooler, I have to be a homeschooler forever." It's like making that choice meant something about their identity. And what I would always tell people is like, you could try it out. You could try homeschooling for a semester. You could try it for a year, and like you could decide that you wanna go back to something else. It's just all about making, like, a conscious decision, and I say the same thing to people who feel stuck where they are, where it's like, "Hey, maybe a gap semester is the right thing, maybe it's not." What I often talk to people about first before, like, making a big decision like that is, what can you be doing right now, um, are there certain inclinations or intuitions you have around how you should be spending your time? And it might be on a particular project. It might just be like, I just really want to like be reading a lot or building a lot, and I don't even know in what space. And then the question is structurally, how do you make that happen for yourself? Maybe it's nights and weekends. Maybe it's that you don't have class on Thursday and you just are like, okay, I'm going to put myself in the lane of doing these other things instead of hoping that I can do them at some point. And then there are often these decision points of, a project or an inclination takes you deeper than what you have time or resources to do. And you make the decision to take a further leap of like, hey, I'm going to take a gap semester or I'm going to do this internship or whatever it happens to be. But I like to think of each of these things as individual separate decision points. And same thing as I was telling, parents about homeschooling. And it's like, you don't have to necessarily take on the identity of being a homeschooler. It's like you don't have to take on the identity of being a student or being a dropout. It's like you get to take on the identity of like, I don't know, being a human who's making decisions in every moment. And the decision that's right for you right now may be very different than the decision that's right for you 3 months from now. And you got to allow yourself flexibility to do that. So, I've always been someone who has pushed really hard, against labels. Like when I was, I don't know, when I was growing up, people would just want to box you in of like, oh, do you believe this thing or that thing? And I was like, oh, I don't like that. I just want to kind of, learn and explore, and not be like put in a box. And so I am often trying to encourage people not to think in a black and white manner. And I think that's something that also developmentally changes for people over time. Like I was definitely a more black and white thinker in my teens and 20s than I am now. Some of that is practice. It's just like, oh, I caught myself in black and white thinking, we get in these habits of how we do things or who we think we are. And then you have these moments where you're able to have clarity about that and make a decision that is from a place of conscientiousness and curiosity rather than habituation.
Everything you're saying to me right now, just like it feels like you're speaking to me. I've always been like I've talked to so many people about this, the labels thing. I feel it with like politics. Like if you get labeled a Democrat, you have to like take on every belief that is associated with Democrats. I've talked to so many like
It's a great
even
example.
I've I've debated with like the concept of being labeled with a religion even. So
Yep,
like
same. Yep,
like, if you say, "I am a Christian," you kind of take on all the beliefs, and I've always been very against that.
yep.
Back to, oh, you're gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say something like I remember when I was growing up, I kind of had this like I don't know what I want to be when I was growing up thing. I think in some ways I did know what I wanted to be in terms of like the archetype of an educator. But I was very everyone told me, like, "Those who can't teach, the pay's terrible," all this stuff. But there was something where I often envied the people who seemed to have this clarity of the label they wanted to take on. Like, I had friends who were like, "Oh, yeah, I've always known that I wanna be a doctor or a nurse," and I was like, "How do you know that?" Like, that's so like, there's part of me that always railed against that, but there was another part of me that was like, "Wow, to have clarity and surety, like, that's, like, a beautiful thing also." But I think the difference is like where that self-assuredness comes from. Is it like mimetically driven of like, "Oh, I think I should be this, so I'm going to say I'm that." Or I think other people will be, impressed by me if I say I'm this thing, or is it like internal where you're like, "No, I'm supposed to be a cardiologist. This is my deal." And like you just know it to your core on the inside. And it's a complicated thing to figure out.
On the topic of higher education, I don't know if you've seen, like, on Twitter and stuff lately, there's tons of, controversy around the whole admissions process right now, and, like, UATX put out this new kind of, like, cool, merit-based thing. I'm actually talking to someone from UATX next week. What do you think about the, current state of higher education? And I guess, how long do you see it doesn't seem sustainable currently.
Yeah, correct. And I think COVID was an interesting turning point. I remember, when COVID started, I was like, man, you know, the fellowship at this point is 15 years old, and we were banging that drum then, and it was heresy to bang that drum that a young person might do something other than go to four-year university. And so it's been interesting to actually watch the like cultural landscape change. When I go and talk to high school classes now, I'm like, the fact that you can even say the words like, should I go to school? Or I'm thinking about other things, and your parents not just losing their minds and actually engaging in conversation, things have changed a lot. But I remember thinking in 2020, man, I didn't expect a global pandemic to really shed this huge spotlight on, okay, wow, schools are still gonna charge the same amount of money and you're not even gonna be there and we're doing, Zoom learning and things like that. Like it really put the absurdity on, the institution of like, okay, what are you really? Like what you really are, is sort of this handbag signal that you're putting out to the world. It's not about teaching. It's not even about being in class at this point. It's just about who wants to pay for an expensive handbag. And I think it's continued to get worse. Um, oh man, I think it's continued to get worse, and, I don't have the rate off the top of my head, but, like, the amount of students who are finishing school is diminishing, and it has been, over the last 10 years, and it just is interesting to me that universities don't seem to pay attention or care about that. Um, and what I'm also seeing is that, like, young people just have more opportunity cost. It's always driven me crazy that schools have continued to stay 4 years. You know, at one point, 4 years didn't seem that long because there weren't as many opportunity costs. It's like you couldn't start a startup. When I was, in school from '98 to 2002, laptops were just coming out. It was like you couldn't be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna create this behemoth company from my dorm room," or, like, have a potential for, getting hired at, like, a startup company. But nowadays, 4 years is a long time. Like, I mean, you could start multiple companies in that time frame. You could be working multiple places in that time frame. I was talking to a mentee of mine who just turned 18. He's just, finishing high school, and he was just being fought over by 2 companies to come work there for the next year, and he's gonna do a gap year, and, he's really excited about this learning curve that he's gonna be on. And this is like the new state of things that, if you can demonstrate to the point you were making earlier, like your talent and your prowess in something, then people want to hire you and bring you into like a really productive working world in a way that wasn't true before. And I think the stigma around not having a degree is just lesser and lesser over time. So I'm always really confused why schools aren't like, "Hey, we're gonna do a 2-year program instead of 4." Like, even that, which is not very radical, would be radical. It's like, even just being like, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna be 2 years. We're gonna be really honest about this. This is about you, like, meeting peers and, like, hanging out with cool people, and, maybe you do some learning also, and you use this as, like, a springboard into young adulthood, like, that would be totally radical, but everybody keeps it 4 years. Um, honestly, I think it's bunk that, uh, University of Austin is getting accreditation. I'm like, "Why?" Like, it's not necessary. Um, so I would prefer that they do more radical things because they have the ability to do that, and, like, stop reinventing the wheel to have the same bad outcome.
It seems like they took this very contrarian radical approach, but also they're slightly trying to fill the hole still. They're trying to conform to what a
Yeah,
university is supposed to be
no,
still, which is a
right.
little confusing to me.
I
Um,
concur.
you seem to be, I guess, against the higher education. Maybe not against,
I'm
but
like,
I
yeah.
guess I guess my question is there still a place for the traditional university system, and who is kind of the person who that's best suited for?
So as is probably noticeable, I'm all about conscious decision making. So I would never want someone to come to me and be like, "Danielle, I dropped out. Aren't you excited?" And I'd be like, "For what reason? Let's talk about if this was a good decision." Um, so yeah, it's interesting. I started charter school 16 years ago, and it's still running. I'm still on the board of it. And it's not about that I think everyone should go to my charter school. It's that I think everyone should have choices in how they are educated. And you might be someone who is educated by doing things in real time. You may be someone who just really loves the classroom. You may be someone who loves self study. And I think all options should be out there, and the, like, understanding of opportunity cost and also the understanding of the cost you're incurring to do that thing should be abundantly clear. People I cannot get over how expensive school is. I was on the USC campus recently. It is $95,000 a year to go there. It's like it is $500,000 by the time you come out of school, and that doesn't include, like, all the other expenses and things like that. And so, yeah, I think if people are going to school and spending that much, I would be very wary of telling anyone to spend that much on a piece of paper. When I talk to people who are doing, in-state tuition at Cal or like Waterloo, things like that, I'm like, yeah, 12,000 bucks a year if you think you're like learning a lot and you like being in that environment, by all means make that decision for yourself. But uh I think a lot of people have the blinders on as far as like what does it mean to come out of school um, with that much financial hardship. It's really, I mean, I can't even imagine when I started my tutoring company, I only had 10K in debt from school, and I was able to pay that off over like a 15-year timeline at a 2% interest rate. And that enabled me to be able to start my tutoring company because I wasn't thinking like, "Oh my god, how am I gonna pay this down?" And I've met so many people who are just saddled with debt, including people with really good jobs. I met a neurologist recently, and she's like, "Thank God my husband works at Google because I'm not getting paid that much. I have over 200,000 in debt from going to medical school, and the interest rate is killing me." She was like, "I haven't even been able to touch the principal amount because the interest rate is some ridiculous amount." And I was like, "Oh my god, like, this is just" and it's funny, she's telling me all this without knowing what I do or what I stand for or anything, it's just a dinner party kind of thing, and it was just such a painful story to hear, and there's so many of these stories, so I think people need to think about what they wanna do right now and how what they're doing right now is gonna affect their future.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
want to.
do I wanna see, like, an abolishment of, any form of, what we might call school? No. Like, my colleague is probably more like, "Yeah, like, kill it all," like, but I'm more in the, like, "Yeah, I just want people to have choices."
I wanna touch on the founder stuff and what 1517 is doing, but one last thing on the education piece. The just in the AI world, this
Mhm.
is changing and evolving so quickly. It's very hard. Like I was gonna ask, like, where do you think this is going? Like, how does it look in the future? I
Mhm.
know there are a few schools like Alpha School recently
Yep,
did the thing where
yep,
they're using full AI tutors and that they're having extreme success. You talked about the one-on-one kind of
yep,
model earlier.
yep, yep.
Um, and it seems to me that with some of these AI synthesis, some of these tutors are doing, it seems that you can have very intelligent, very
Mhm.
high level education still technically like on a one-on-one basis, like
Yep,
hyper personalization.
yep.
So what do you see the impact of AI and how radically does this kind of shake education, you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. We run a teen camp, as part of what we do at 1517. It's called 2E. We've run it for 2 years now, and it's ages 14 to 18. And it's been really interesting because, we keep in touch with these teens and watching their rate of learning on things is just ridiculous. It's like straight up. Um, and I think it's like especially for young people who have been able to find that personal motivation in something, um, it's like the sky is the absolute limit. I was talking to a potential investor in 1517 recently, and he's like, what's it like, where do you wanna be in 15 years?" And I was like, "I wanna be funding 11-year-olds." Like, I want to be like, "Hey, you're ready. Like, let's get you building something. Let's go." And he laughed, and I was like, "I'm, like, mostly serious." Like, I think one of our contrarian truths at 1517 is that child labor is good. And, we don't mean in the exploitative sense. We mean in the like, there's so much creativity and energy. And to be told you have to wait, you have to keep waiting when this learning curve is getting accelerated, doesn't make any sense anymore. And I think is like just becoming clearer and clearer. And yeah, I'm, like, really curious, for example, for this year to, like, run our camp again and just be like, "All right, people have had these tools in their hands for a couple of years at this point," and we do a whole thing with our camp where there's a sort of an unconference day where the young people all, like, share knowledge with each other, and it's just ridiculous. I'm like, "Wow, these people are, like, hyper fluent in the areas that they're super passionate about at 16, at 15, at 14." And so I think it's gonna be kind of undeniable to realize like, hey, like the typical in the classroom learning all at the same rate as everybody else. I mean, I think it's been over for a long time, but it is more accessible to more people at this point. And to the point we were talking about earlier, it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes of like, it becomes even clearer to people like, hey, this institution wants to hold you back in like a group instead of letting you, like, run forward and, see what you can actually do. So I'm really excited about where these tools take people, um, and, like, to continue to fund younger and younger people because they're gonna be able to get at the frontier of knowledge, like, faster than ever.
On the so for founders specifically, a common piece of advice is don't start something just to start something.
Sure.
It's I guess like going just wanting to be a founder is enough to like go
Yep.
found something, I guess.
I think that's a terrible reason to do something.
Comparatively, the counter argument is founding something actually brings a lot of skills that
Yep.
enable you to be a super good employee at, say, if you wanted to go
Sure.
work at a startup.
Yeah. Yeah,
So what
that's
do you
totally
think about that? And what kind of self-awareness does someone have about the traits that
yeah.
they may or may not have to be a
Yeah.
good founder?
We say at 15, 17 that, like, um, starting a project that could become a startup or something that you're already we talked about not labeling things too early, so I often like to talk about projects because it's like, I don't know, maybe this turns into a startup, maybe it doesn't. Um, but that doing something that is going to call forth from you more than you know how to give, or things where that are gonna be really uncomfortable for you, is like one of the greatest gauntlets you can put yourself through. Because the act of I was talking to a founder yesterday, and he's like, "I have to do all these things I'm super uncomfortable with. I have to cold call people. I have to, like, put myself out there in these ways. I have to really be very clear-headed about what I'm good at and what I'm not good at." And it was like, "Yeah, welcome to the arena." Like, that is what a startup is gonna call from you. And this is why I think it's really important that you're working on something that's important to you, that is, like, worth not just your mind share, but your heart and your soul, because it is going to take everything from you to do this. Um, it doesn't mean that your first thing that you work on has to be necessarily the, like, "This is my biggest thing ever and most important thing ever," but you, I think at a minimum, have to, like, really care about the creation of this thing and bringing it into the world. You're literally, like, birthing something new, and if you're kind of more in the, like, business model innovation side of things, what we find with people is that that is not enough to get you through the dark night of the soul, or making that hard phone call, or having that hard conversation with a team member about, "Hey, this isn't working out," and things like that. It's just too hard, and so I feel like you have to have at least some level of, like, real care, about the thing that you're working on. Otherwise, like, you just drop it, too soon. So that's an important piece for us, and this is important with the grants that we give out. We have something called the Medici Project, where it's like, yeah, people like, it doesn't have to be in fact, I prefer that it not be the biggest thing in the world on the Medici Project. These are often teenagers. I have a young lady right now who is working on building a remote control car from scratch. And it's like, that's awesome. Like, she really wants to understand how all these components work together. And I was like, yes, this is exactly like the type of project and the type of person I want to give a grant to. Someone who wants to explore and figure this out and she cares about it. Is it gonna be her, like, biggest thing ever? Obviously not. But it's like the stepping stones to getting there. And you can tell when someone is really excited and passionate about something that they want to build versus when it kind of has this, like, oh, it's just kind of something to do nature of it. And you can also tell fairly quickly the people where it's like they've fallen into the mimetic startups are cool, so I'm going to do a startup. Um, and like we I've had so many meetings with people where I can tell that fire in the belly is not there. I had these 2 YC founders come in and talk to me, and, they were talking about what they were building, and I don't even remember what the tool was, to be honest, but, like, there was no fire in the belly, and at this point in my career, I've gotten pretty, like, good at just being really straight with what, I'm experiencing, talking to people, and I was like, "Hey, guys, like, time out." I was like, and I just told him, I said, "Maybe I'm really off here, but I'm not feeling the fire in the belly on this. Like, I hear that you're lost. I hear that you're NYC and feel like you need to figure something out. And I'm not hearing that this is the thing that you're willing to spend pain and suffering in the next 10 years of your life on." And, like, it was so great, like, they sat back and they were like, "Yeah, that's kinda where we're at right now." And I was like, "Take me back." I was like, "Take me into your childhood. What are things that you really enjoyed when you were younger, like, in this, like, purest state?" And one of them was like, "Trains. I just love trains so much." And I was like, "Okay, feel that." I was like, "Feel how excited you are about trains versus the thing you just talked to me about." And he's like, "Yeah, I totally get it." So I was like, "I don't know what you guys are supposed to be doing. I don't think you're supposed to be doing the thing you're pitching right now just based on, like, your affect in this conversation, but, like, let's talk later." And they came back later and they're like, "Yeah, they're still doing software stuff. They were like, "Yeah, we're building software for train systems." And I was like, "Hell yeah, like, that is amazing." And actually these companies ended up selling their software, to one of, like, the larger transportation companies, and, like, it went well, and it's like, okay, like, that alignment had to be there to move this forward. So I think it's really important that people figure out what is that thing that they really wanna put their whole self around, and it's hard. It's really hard to figure out, like, searching for that thing you wanna do, is challenging. I think sometimes you can also think about who do you want to build with? Who do you feel really alive around? And like when you're building together, that like the world is your oyster, even if you don't know what that pearl is, it's like you might be able to find it with that team. So those are a couple ways to think about these things. But yeah, I think the um being a founder to be a founder, is hard, and one of the things that I often see is people who are finishing school, they know the job market is kinda junk, and they're like, "I'm starting this startup," and I'm like, "Okay, what I hear under the surface is I don't know where I'm gonna get a job, I'm starting this because I need a paycheck," and it's like, that all may be true, but that's not a good enough, like, sustaining motivation, to spend years of your early career on something.
Yeah. I may keep this next part and I may take it out, but more on a very personal side. Like
Yeah.
I'm 20 years old now, and this problem that 1517's working on, stuff that Thiel Fellowship's working on, is a deeply personal issue for me because like I can just vividly remember ever since early middle school, I was just like freaking out about like this path is carved. Like what's like I was very existential about it almost. I'm like, why am I doing this? And college just seemed so out of it. So I guess for me, what is it like, this is kind of an issue I want to work on. So is it I start a new startup, like a new kind of AI synthesis, like education type thing, or is it going and working at one of these trying to
Yeah.
work at Thiel Fellowship, something like that? Like what kind of where do you see this evolving? Like starting a new kind of accelerator, a new college alternative? Like where I guess where do you see?
Are you asking me, like, how you might think about your thinking about this? Is that yeah, I just wanna
Mm,
clarify the
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Interesting. Um, alright, I'm gonna ask you some questions. Um, let's talk to your 26-year-old self right now. What do you think your 26-year-old self would tell your 20-year-old self now about that question? Maybe let's even make him 27. Let's make him a tiny bit older.
Is I so it's actually something I've wanted to do with this podcast too. So, like the building my brand, but also talking about these issues I'm deeply passionate about. I had Augustus on a couple weeks ago, and we talked a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this issue as well. And I think that if I just wish I could give advice and just tell my younger self like it's okay. You can kind of go off. You can deviate a little bit. Like that's what I really
And what does that mean? Tell me, what does deviate mean?
just off this beaten path that seems so, like especially for me, I guess, for some people, it's not as much. I would say for me, it was, I kind of grew up and my parents were both in the same industry. They both did, like, HR. It was very like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to college for business, and then I'm gonna get an internship at this, like, an HR consulting firm," and it's just like, this seems so unfulfilling for me, and, like, I
That's a
wanna right, I wanna branch, basically.
how would you encapsulate this? How would you answer the question, "What do you want to make absurd?"
Make absurd.
Yeah. Like, that people would look back in the future and be like, "Wow, that is so crazy that the world used to look like this."
Make absurd, I would say that that societally you're just there's just an assumption that you're supposed to go to to a 4-year degree college. Like that sounds crazy to me. Thinking from first principles, especially for like what the cost and value is currently of higher education, it makes absolutely 0 sense to me, and I don't think it will make much
Yeah.
sense to people
Yeah.
30 years from now. However, if you historically, the education system doesn't change, or it hasn't changed, I guess. So I hope it
Changes.
looks absurd.
Yeah, and what changes is people's decisions about it, I think, and ideally, that would drive actual institutional change, we shall see. I think one thing that I'm kind of resonating with here is, I don't think it's about having your whole path laid out and figured out like, "Hey, my 27-year-old self, I said I should do this and this and this." It's more like, "What's my North Star?" And, like, what I'm hearing from you about your North Star is that it's about getting people outside of these boxes. And actually, when I was around your age, I read this book called Zen and the Art of Making a Living, and it's a workbook, and it kinda has you go through and, like, craft what you think your personal mission might be. And what I figured out fairly early on was that my personal mission is to bring freedom, agency, and autonomy to young people. And the thing is that that has looked totally different over time. I didn't set out when I was 22 to like be like, I'm going to start a venture fund. I had no idea what VC was. But what I knew was like, I wanted this sense of young people having choices to be out there. And the first step in that was starting my tutoring company and then working with homeschoolers and, like, being the type of, you know, uh, influence on young people where it was like, "Cool, let's actually talk about that you think school sucks, and I'm not gonna say to you, 'No, you're wrong, and here's why this class is important, and eventually you're gonna use calculus at the grocery store.'" Like, I'm not gonna make up stuff. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm actually gonna resonate with you about your experience. And, like, that was my first sort of, like, moment of enacting on that mission. And then that looked like starting a charter school and, like, bringing this, into a more, like, institutional setting. What does it mean to have a really wily school where children have, like, choices and freedoms? And then it looked like coming into the Thiel Fellowship orbit and running the fellowship, and now it looks like 15, 17. So I think the thing that's really important for actually everybody is to find your North Star. And the thing is that the way that you sort of, like, align yourself with your North Star is gonna change over time, but the North Star doesn't change. This is the thing about a really good mission statement is that it's asymptotic. You can never fully realize it. It's like there's always more freedom, agency, and autonomy to bring to young people. And actually, at one point, I was getting into really like human rights activism stuff, and I was like, man, at some point, maybe my vision expands to like freedom, agency, and autonomy, just like for humans. I have a particular love of working with young people. I think, children are particularly disenfranchised, and like not taken seriously and young people and teens and things like this. So like that to me is like just really personally resonates. But I really think it's about like crafting what is your North Star and what do certain steps look like. And that those steps will change over time. And I think there's way too much focus on like it, I don't know, there's always this, like, if you could, like, freeze time or go back in time, would you? And I'm like, I would personally not wanna be 20 right now in 2025, like, in part because of all the pressures. Like, if when I was 22 and I started my tutoring company, no one said to me, "Oh, well, that's not venture scalable." Now, people did tell me, "Oh, you can't make money doing it." Oh, I had everybody has tried to build a tutoring company and almost nobody has done it in a way that is sustainable. And I was like, "I don't know, I still wanna try." But I'm really glad that I wasn't in the, like, mimetic bubble of, like, "Oh, it's not venture scalable," and it's like, who gives a shit? Like, do the thing you're supposed to do, and it will lead you to bigger things. It's like starting my little tutoring company that says sustained me, led me to doing bigger and bigger things, and it's the place that I could have agency and start. I would say the same to you is like, think about one of my favorite phrases is like one foot in front of the other. It's like, just think about like, okay, where can you put one foot in front of the other on this? And I think part of that is this podcast of like having other people hear, um, like, oh wow, wait, I could like wake up and realize I don't have to do these things that don't feel right to me.
That makes a ton of sense. The 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 environment here is very, tech and startup heavy, you know?
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
they're definitely pushing people into,
Yeah. Well, I
like,
think something just to like what we talked about earlier, it's another ism. Oh, are you a startup founder? Like, "Oh, do you have a C corp?" It's like, "Okay, like, let's not make that the new institution."
Yeah, that's super good, actually. Yeah. I do want to kind of wrap here with
Yeah,
15, 17, and
sure.
the kind of science stuff you guys are on, the Medici stuff. I think it's super cool, everything that's going on over there.
Yeah. Yeah, we have so much fun with what we do and who we work with, and what we say is, like, we like to work with people who are going to bring us to the frontier of knowledge. So, you know, people like Josie with the Los Angeles Project, people like Augustus with Rainmaker, um, these people have that, like, insatiable, like, "I'm out here to do crazy shit" energy, and we love to work with people like that. And we work with people who don't have degrees, and then we will break our thesis in the name of science fiction, so, like, Josie is a good example of this. Josie, went through her PhD, saw that the inner temple was barren, and was like, "Okay, wait a second, I'm gonna do this on my own." So we also work with these like renegade scientists who are like pushing up against the bounds of those boxes and saying, "I think there's something else here." And one of the things we've been talking about, because we're in our 10th year of operation, we're starting to launch our fourth fund right now. Uh, is like we like it sounds absurd when I say it, but I'll just say it, is like we really believe early stage venture is a place where like an actual scientific revolution can happen. If you have funds like us who are unafraid to get R&D started, like we could have potentially a very different world, even in a venture timeline of 10 years, which is what we're beholden to our investors of like, okay, we want to see things like really come to fruition. This morning, Zeno Power, one of our teams, they dusted off some old research from Vanderbilt. They were both undergrads. They took the leap and said, "Hey, we want to start working on this." This was like 7, 8 years ago at this point, and they just announced today a partnership where they're going to be powering technology on the moon. And I'm like, yes, like that's amazing. And yeah, it's taken a lot. They have about 60 employees now. They just raised their Series B. And it's been a long journey. It's been 7 years, and these guys were probably like 21-ish when they started this. And so one of the things we talk to people about a lot is like, whatever you're working on, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, has to be worth like spending your entire adult life on. It's like, this isn't just part of your life. This is like your entire adult life, and it's a third of your entire life if you're getting started at something like 20 years old. So we get really excited about people who are really wanting to like make something absurd in the future and make this real big dent in the universe. And it turns out that things that make a dent in the universe actually like have large market sizes, where it's like, okay, if your ambition is really, really huge, to do something like, let's make, deserts into grasslands and things like that. Like, I mean, like thinking about sort of like the global macro outcomes of these types of things. Um, I mean, it's too big for my brain to fully wrap around, but it's extraordinary.